NATO, a strong today for a safe tomorrow. Hello there, children. I'm here today to talk to you about something called NATO. Do you know what NATO is? No, I didn't think so. Well, NATO is something very important for you and for me that guarantees the safety of everything we hold dear. Okay, I see we're gonna have to take this slow. Think of NATO as a boat, sailing the Atlantic Ocean. Now everyone on this boat are great friends, much like you and your schoolyard chums. The world is filled with all kinds of people, most of them good, but sometimes we come across a few troublemakers who try to ruin everyone else's fun. And sure enough, when we do, just like schoolyard, NATO member countries look out for each other. Indeed, the world can be a dangerous place, but by working together, the NATO boat stays afloat. But how did all these NATO countries come to be such good friends? Well, the early 20th century was a time when important men with big ideas tried things out to see what worked. Needless to say, everyone didn't always get along, and the resulting misunderstanding came to be known as World War II. With the end of the war, and so many troublemakers out of the way, it became clear to many of the world's straight-shooting countries that they'd better not get caught by surprise again. With the growing robustness of the Soviet Union and its different way of doing things, some countries grew concerned that the Soviets might turn out to be even bigger troublemakers than Hitler and his friends had been. Now, communists didn't start out evil, they just became that way as part of God's curse on them for their lack of faith. In any case, a few ramshackle nations banded together to form the well-meaning but hideously inadequate Western European Union. It was obvious to all that these limp-wristed Europeans couldn't hold out for long against the impending menace and poisonous ideas of the Soviet Union. They needed help. In fact, what they needed was the United States of America, as, by this time, with the help of the atom bomb, the USA had proved itself to be the greatest country in the world. With the hop-to-it, go-getter attitude of the United States, other countries were quick to follow their lead in building a safer world. These countries were Canada, Denmark, Iceland, Italy, and for what it was worth, Portugal. So, in 1949, all these countries signed the North Atlantic Treaty, forming the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. This treaty helped to ensure a new era of peace, happiness, and prosperity that came to be known as the Cold War. This was a fine time for Western civilization, as NATO was more than simply a military alliance. It was in fact a banding together of right-minded countries who had realized that they all shared common values: democracy, freedom, and free market capitalism. And they were making new friends all the time. Now, with the remilitarization of West Germany, the Soviets and their friends had made their own agreement, albeit a less wholesome one. The Warsaw Pact, signed in 1955 by Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and of course the Soviet Union, was much like a pact that one might sign with the devil. Their justification for forming this military alliance was that the power now quite properly held by NATO countries was a threat to them, and that NATO must be kept in check. So, like it or not, the Warsaw Pact was signed, and member countries joined forces, readying for war. The communist decision to isolate themselves from the civilized world was cemented in their building of the Berlin Wall, which separated the German city of Berlin into the communist East and the free and breezy West. Indeed, tensions remained high throughout the Cold War as Western democratic powers kept a close watch on the Soviet Union. Sometimes, NATO member countries were forced to take action when in control. Unfortunately, the NATO treaty at this time didn't call for action unless a NATO country was directly threatened. So, most often, they supported their friends with funding and equipment. Overall, however, the NATO alliance was successful, as peace was maintained and the feared nuclear exchange between East and West never took place. By 1989, the weight of the Great Soviet Bear finally took its toll on the evil empire, and the Berlin Wall came down, reuniting the Germanys and prompting the collapse of the Soviet Union. NATO was finally victorious, and by 1991, the USSR was officially dismantled. With the Soviet Union out of the way, things were looking peachy for NATO countries. But some naysayers began to wonder whether NATO still had a place in the world, since the communist threat had calmed down. Admittedly, at this time, NATO was a little like a boat with no captain. You see, by this point, NATO and all its friends had built up quite a collection of troops and equipment. Numerous bases around the world were now home to NATO. And every year, NATO member countries had taken to investing important amounts of money into ensuring world safety. And everywhere NATO went, they fulfilled their God-given duty as peacekeepers of the world. Indeed, some of NATO's less informed critics seem to think that, with the Soviet threat subdued, there were better things for them to spend their money on. Thankfully, however, that quickly changed. Some troublemakers in one of the more rustic parts of Europe, a country once known as Yugoslavia, began causing problems for the good and productive citizens, effectively splitting the country apart. Without boring you with the details, one of the groups in this conflict, known as the Serbs, did something that NATO didn't like. They flew their warplanes over a NATO-imposed no-fly zone, an act of aggression. For the first time, NATO had to get down to business and use direct deadly force. Regrettable, perhaps, but necessary to preserve peace. Indeed, this incident proved beyond a doubt that NATO still has a purpose in the world today, to keep the world safe for you and me, and to punish our enemies. Yes, NATO, life in the West would be as brutish and short as it is in the East, and that alone is reason enough for NATO to stick around for a long, long time. That's right, NATO is there, ensuring all of us today for a safe tomorrow. After all, history won't dictate itself, you know.